The wind carried the red dust of Arizona plains, rolling it across the fading sunlight. It was near dusk when John Ryder saw her. His horse snorted as the figure stumbled from the dry creek bed, wrapped in an old blanket, her feet bare and her face streaked with dirt. At first he thought it was a trick of the light or maybe a runaway child, but when she lifted her head he saw she was older, a young woman, and her eyes held the kind of fire that did not belong to someone lost. It belonged to someone who had fought too long to give up. John slowed his horse and called out softly, his voice steady. The girl didn't answer. She stood still, waiting, like an animal unsure if the hand reaching toward it meant safety or harm. Her dark hair fell loose over her shoulders, tangled from wind and dust. Her skin carried the bronze hue of the Apache, and her thin frame trembled from cold and hunger. He dismounted, careful not to make sudden moves, and offered her his canteen. For a moment she hesitated. Then she drank, eyes locked on his, wary but desperate. When she finished, she whispered something in broken English. "No harm?" she asked. John nodded. "No harm," he said softly. "You need food, don't you?" She didn't answer. She only looked past him toward the empty land as if expecting someone to follow. When he turned, there was no one there. Just the wind and the growing night. John led her to his horse and helped her up. She resisted at first, murmuring words in Apache he couldn't understand, but finally her strength gave out. She leaned against him as the horse carried them toward the ranch. His ranch lay in a small valley where the cottonwoods still had a little green left. It wasn't much, just a two-room house, a barn and a corral, but it was home. When they arrived, he helped her down and she nearly fell. He caught her by the arm, steadying her. "Easy now," he said. She looked at him again as if testing the truth in his eyes. Then softly she spoke, her voice dry and thin. "I need men to go on living," she said. Her words made no sense at first, but they carried such weight, such tired sadness that he didn't ask what she meant. He only helped her inside. He gave her food, just beans and bread, and she ate slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't eaten in days. Afterward, she sat near the fire, eyes half closed. He asked her name. She looked up at him and said, "Tyann." Her voice trembled on the word. Then she pointed toward the hills. "My people?" "Gone," she said. "No camp. No brothers." John understood enough. The wars between settlers and tribes had left too many like her, wandering, starving, with nowhere to go. He didn't ask what had happened. He'd seen enough death to know. He just nodded and said, "You're safe here, Tyann." She looked into the fire for a long time before speaking again. "You are alone?" He nodded. "Yes, my wife died years back. I just have the land now." She nodded slowly. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of the wind outside and the crackling of the fire. Later, when she fell asleep by the hearth, John covered her with a blanket. He watched her for a moment. Even in sleep, her hands were tight fists, ready to fight. Something about her stirred old memories, of the war, of loss, of the kind of loneliness that made a man talk to the stars. He went outside and looked up. The sky stretched wide and cold. Somewhere out there, he thought, were the same stars she had seen from her camp before everything changed. Morning came with the sound of roosters and the smell of dust. Tyann was already awake, sitting near the door. When he stepped out, she rose quickly, ready to leave. "You go?" he asked. She nodded. "I take path east," he frowned. "There's nothing east but dry land and soldiers. You won't make it far." She looked at him with quiet pride. "I walked far before," she said. "I can walk again," he sighed. "You can stay a few days if you like. Work if you want. You'll eat better here." She hesitated. Then she gave a small nod. That was how it began. She stayed. At first, she kept her distance. She helped with water, cleaned tools, fed the horse, but she never spoke much. She moved with quiet grace, her steps light, her eyes always scanning the horizon. At night, she sat near the fire, silent, watching the flames. Sometimes John caught her humming softly, a tune that didn't belong to his world. One afternoon, he found her out by the corral trying to mend a fence. The hammer was too heavy for her, and she dropped it with a sigh. He walked over and took it from her. "You don't have to do all this," he said. She looked up, her face calm but serious. "I do," she said. "If I stay, I must work." "I'm not weak," he smiled faintly. "Didn't say you were." For a moment their eyes met, and there was something there, a small understanding, the kind that doesn't need words. Days turned into weeks. Slowly she began to trust him. She started speaking more, telling small things about her people, about her brother who could track a deer through rocks, about the songs they sang to call the dawn, about how the earth had once been their mother. Her words carried sadness but also strength. John listened quietly. He had never known much about the Apache except what soldiers said, and hearing her stories made him realize how much had been lost on both sides. One evening, a storm rolled in from the mountains. The sky turned dark and rain poured hard on the tin roof. Tyan stood at the doorway, watching the lightning flash across the desert. "The sky is angry," she said. John looked out with her. "It'll pass," he said. She shook her head slightly. "Not sky," she whispered. "Men." He didn't ask what she meant. But later, when the storm quieted and he stepped outside to check the horses, he saw tracks, fresh hoof prints leading toward the ranch. He returned quietly and told her. She froze. "Soldiers?" she asked. He nodded. "Could be." She went pale. Her hands trembled slightly and she stepped back from the door. "They take me if they find me," she said. Her voice was calm, but her eyes were full of fear. John looked at her for a long moment. Then he said firmly, "They won't. You're under my roof. I'll handle it." She shook her head. "You help me. They hurt you." He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't be the first time I took a few knocks for doing the right thing." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire again, hugging her knees. John sat across from her, silent. After a long time she spoke softly as if to herself. "I said I need men to go on living," she murmured. "Not to own me. Not to command me. To let me breathe. To not die alone in wind." Her voice broke on the last word. John didn't move closer, didn't speak. He just sat with her, letting the silence hold them both. Outside, the rain stopped and the world turned still. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called long and low. The night carried it away, and for the first time since she had come, Tyan closed her eyes and slept without fear. John watched her and knew the world would never see her as he did, not as a stranger, not as a danger, but as a soul caught between two dying worlds. And as the embers faded, he made himself a quiet promise. He would keep her safe no matter what came down from those hills. Morning came soft and gray after the storm. The earth smelled fresh and the rain had washed the dust from the land. But the peace did not last long. John saw riders on the far ridge. 3 men on horses, their uniforms dusty but clear enough to recognize. Soldiers. He stood on the porch, one hand resting on the post, watching them ride closer. Tyan was inside, but she must have felt the same unease because she appeared behind him silently. Her eyes followed the horses as they descended the slope. "They come," she whispered. John nodded slowly. "Stay inside," he said. "Let me talk." She shook her head, fear and pride fighting in her face. "If they see me, they take me," she said. He turned to her. "Then they won't see you." He went to the barn, his boots crunching on the wet ground. The soldiers reached the gate just as he came out, wiping his hands on a rag like a man who had nothing to hide. The lead soldier was young, maybe 20, with eyes that tried too hard to look cold. "Morning," John said. The young man nodded. "Morning, sir. We're looking for a runaway Apache. Might have crossed this way after the rain." John looked toward the hills and then back at the soldier. "I've seen no one," he said calmly. The soldier squinted at him. "You live alone out here?" "Just me," John said. "Got some cattle, some fences that need mending, that's about it." The soldier looked past him toward the barn. "Mind if we take a look around?" John's jaw tightened slightly, but he forced a small smile. "Ain't much to see. But go ahead." They rode past him and began checking the barn, the corral, the sheds. Inside the house, Tyan crouched low near the back wall, clutching the blanket close to her chest. Her heart beat fast. She could hear their voices outside, boots hitting the ground, the sound of horses snorting. John stayed by the door, pretending to fix a rope. When one soldier tried to look through the window, he called out sharply, "Hey now, don't spook my horse. She kicks if strangers get too close." The soldier gave him a short glance and backed off. They stayed a few more minutes asking questions, but they found nothing. Finally, the young officer nodded. "All right. Sorry to bother you, sir. We'll move on west." John gave a polite nod. "Safe travels." They turned their horses and rode off, their figures shrinking into the distance. John stood there until they disappeared beyond the ridge. Then he exhaled slowly, his shoulders relaxing for the first time that morning. Inside, Tyan was still crouched. When he entered, she looked up. eyes wide with relief and disbelief. "They gone?" she asked. He nodded. "Gone." She rose slowly, her body trembling slightly. "You lie for me," she said softly. He shrugged. "Wouldn't be the first lie I told for a good reason." Her eyes filled with quiet emotion. "They would take me back to place with fences. I'm not free there." He nodded. "I know." For a while she stood silent. Then she whispered, "Why you help me, John Ryder?" He looked at her, his expression calm but honest. "Because no one helped me once when I needed it most," he said. "And I still remember what that felt like." She didn't answer, but her eyes glistened in the firelight. She turned away, sitting near the window. The wind outside had settled, leaving the land quiet and wide again. Days passed after that, each one a little easier than the last. Tyan began to laugh sometimes, a quiet, short laugh, but it was something. She learned to ride one of John's calmer horses. She helped herd the cattle and mend the fences. John noticed how quickly she learned, how her hands were sure and her eyes sharp. She didn't waste words, but when she spoke, her thoughts carried weight. One evening, while they were fixing a broken rail, John said, "You could stay here longer if you wanted. Nobody's going to bother you now." She looked at him, thoughtful. "You want me stay?" He nodded. "If you want to. The place feels less empty when you're here." She smiled faintly, her eyes softening. "I not belong to this land," she said. He looked at the horizon, then back at her. "Maybe not. But the land doesn't care what name you call it. It just wants someone to keep it alive." She thought about that, and that night when she sat by the fire, she whispered to herself, "Maybe that is enough." Weeks became months. The ranch changed. Tan planted a small garden near the house, and John built a fence around it. Sometimes she sang while working, old Apache songs that rose and fell like the wind through the canyons. John didn't understand the words, but he felt them all the same. One morning, she brought him a carved wooden charm she had made from a branch. "For you," she said shyly. "Keep safe." He took it gently, turning it over in his hands. "You made this?" She nodded. "My mother says spirit stays in wood when we give it love." He tied it around his wrist and smiled. "Then I'll keep it close." It was a small moment, but it stayed with both of them. Then came the letter. A writer from town brought it one afternoon, a folded envelope with the Army's seal. John read it on the porch, his face growing grim. The message said the government was rounding up all remaining Apache in the area to relocate them east. Any settlers found harboring them would face charges. He folded the letter and looked out toward the fields where Tyan was gathering water. For a long moment, he stood there, torn between duty and heart. When she came back, she saw the look on his face. "What happened?" she asked. He handed her the letter. She read slowly, struggling with the words, but her eyes widened with understanding. "They come again," she said quietly. He nodded. "Maybe soon." She lowered her head. "Then I go. I not bring trouble for you." He reached out, stopping her. "You're not leaving," he said firmly. "Not like that." She shook her head. "You risk too much." He looked at her with calm strength. "It's my choice. You have a right to live free. That's worth any risk." She didn't answer, but tears filled her eyes. That night they packed quietly. John saddled 2 horses and took supplies. Before dawn, they left the ranch behind, riding through the open desert. The world was wide and endless before them, the stars still bright overhead. They rode until the sun rose, turning the land gold and red. When they reached the edge of the canyon, Tyan stopped and looked back. "You leave your home," she said softly. He nodded. "Home's not wood and nails. It's where you decide to stay." For a moment she said nothing. Then she smiled faintly. "Then maybe this land still has room for both of us." They found a small valley deep in the canyon, where a spring ran clear and the wind was quiet. There they made a small camp. Days passed in peace. John hunted, Tyan gathered herbs and built a shelter. Sometimes they would sit by the fire at night, the sky full of stars, and she would tell stories of her people, of spirits, of mountains that spoke, of rivers that remembered names. John would listen, letting her voice fill the silence. One night she looked at him and said, "You give me back my life." He smiled gently. "You gave me back mine too." Time moved on and the soldiers never found them. Word spread quietly through nearby settlers that a rancher and an Apache woman lived somewhere out in the canyons, far from the noise of war, tending the land together. Years later, when travelers passed through that valley, they sometimes found an old cabin by the spring, a few wildflowers growing near the door, and carvings of two figures side by side on the wood, one man, one woman watching over the desert. No one knew their names, but the locals told stories. They said a rancher once took in a girl who had lost everything, and instead of turning her away, he gave her a home. They said she spoke words the wind still carried. I need men to go on living, not to rule, not to fight, but to stay kind, to stay good. And those who heard that story always rode on with a quiet heart, remembering that somewhere in the wildlands, two souls had chosen peace when the world around them had forgotten it.